I would love once again to invite all my lovely Episcopal friends to not be afraid of the front rows. We won't hurt you, I promise. And on the live stream, it really is a little bit sad if we have empty rows in the front. They cannot see your beautiful faces and heads from back there. You're not on camera if you're up here, just the back of your head. So please, please, please come on up, and we will get started in just a few seconds. Episcopalians are afraid of the front row. Well, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to St. John's Dean's Forum. I'm Tina Clark, Director of Christian Formation, and I want to welcome everyone who made it here in person on this almost holiday weekend, and all of you joining us online. Thank you for being here. We are so glad that Dr. Jenna Glover is able to be back with us this week. She was scheduled for last week and unfortunately got the crud, as we are wont to do. I spoke to her, so I can vouch. So she's back this week, and we're so glad that she's able to be here because this topic is so important to all of us, whether you have children in your life or not. As part of the Cathedral community, you have an impact on all of the children that we are around here at St. John's. And it's been a rough time for them. Last year, in October of 2021, I believe it was, Children's Hospital joined other mental health professionals in declaring a national state of emergency for our youth and their mental health. Their need for care has just skyrocketed, and it was already high. So we are really glad that Jenna can be here. Dr. Jenna Glover is the Director of Psychology Training at Children's Hospital here in Denver, and welcome to St. John's.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I am grateful to be here today. Thank you for being here so I can talk to you about something that is near and dear to my heart and something that I think is really important for our society as a whole to have information about. So we can go ahead and switch to the next slide. So we'll just wait. Technology, it's great. So One of my hopes today here's some of the objectives, just to understand kind of what was the impact of the pandemic on youth mental health, what are some strategies to support our youth, and everything I talk about today not only is good for youth, but it's good for you, right? And that's such an important component because one of the best predictors of youth mental health is the mental health of the adults in their life, okay, especially parents. And one of the things I always say is we can't help dysregulated children if we're dysregulated adults and if we're not taking care of ourselves. And so it's such an important component. So keep that in mind, that what I talk about today is not just for them, it's for all of us. And I also hope you just have fun. You know, my goal of presenting is that you maybe leave here with some information, but also, you know, that you feel a little more awake versus more sleepy when you leave here today. So we'll see if that happens. All right, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so this is a really important statistic, and we call this the 2020 problem. So this was pre-pandemic, but 1 in 5 youth have a mental illness. Now, 50% of those youth will have that experience before the age of 14, and the remaining 50% will have it after the age of 14. So adolescence is definitely a tough time for kiddos. Now, the reason we call it the 2020 problem, the first 20 is 20% of youth have a mental health illness. The second part of the 20, of those 1 in 5, only 20% of them actually get mental health treatment. Now, can you imagine that if only 20% of kids with diabetes or 20% of kids with cancer got treatment? I mean, we would be up in arms about that. That would be absolutely unacceptable. But for some reason, we don't have the same response to mental health. Although, what is the number one cause of death for youth in our state, 10 to 24? It's suicide. It's the most deadly thing. And so this is a really, really important topic. And before the pandemic started, one of the things we saw is over the last 2 decades, youth mental health has worsened. So between 2016 and 2019, rates of anxiety rose by 27% among youth and rates of depression by 24%, and that was before the pandemic. Now, I titled my presentation, Fuel to the Fire. And the reason I did that is because we were already in a crisis, and the pandemic just poured fuel onto that. And so now we have seen rates, and I'm going to talk about it here in just a minute, continue to go up. And so we were already in a poor state, and we're continuing to be in a worse state. Now, how do you think Colorado does with youth mental health? We ranked high or low? Low. Yes, we're ranked low. And that oftentimes is surprising to people because I think we pride ourselves in the state on being health conscious, getting out, being active. But over the last 5 or 6 years, we have bounced around from being 40th in the nation for youth mental health access to 33rd to 36th. And they base those things on like the number of children who have major depressive disorder, substance abuse problems, and the amount of services to provide therapy for them. And we just don't have a lot of great access to those resources in our state. So this was already a problem. What has the pandemic done to that? So some things to think about. So next slide, please. So over the last 2.5 years, our kids really have experienced some what we call both chronic and acute disruptions. So if you think about this, they've experienced all kinds of educational obstacles. Some of these kids haven't ever even experienced what it's like to be at school fully. Can you imagine being a kindergartner in 2020? And now you're a second grader and you're supposed to just be going to school, right? Like it's a normal, regular thing. And although the pandemic was disruptive for all of us, if you think about a child, your life is really marked in school years. There's major milestones that happen. So not only are you learning certain foundational things like, reading or writing, or, I never did calculus, but I'm sure some kids do, some really important things. And then it's gone. A whole year of that's gone, not to mention the social aspect of it. So looking forward to dances or extracurricular activities. I played soccer in high school, and you know what I remember most about high school? Going to the state championship. It was the most important experience of my young adult life, or my young person life. And for some kids, that was taken from them. And so this is a big, huge problem. Now, on top of that, over 200,000 children in this country lost a parent during the pandemic. Okay? Now, one of the things we know that impacts long-term mental health is what we call ACEs. These are adverse childhood experiences. And we know that a certain number of ACEs is actually helpful. We want adversity for children because adversity helps us be resilient. So we know that having 2 or 3 ACEs is an okay thing. It helps with resiliency. But 3 or more is quite a terrible thing. And so if you think about just the normal adverse experiences that kids are going to have in life, the pandemic has increased the number that some kids will experience. And it's put them on a course that their mental health is more in danger as adults than people who weren't children during the pandemic. Okay, additionally, we know that 17 million children in our country are currently experiencing hunger on a consistent basis. That's 6 million more than before the pandemic. So it's had this major disruption on our kids' lives that's going to definitely impact their mental health. So let's look at what the numbers are. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was in 2021, looking at and asking parents, essentially for teenagers, what problems they had seen. And this will be a spoiler alert. For whatever reason, and I'll give you some examples later on, we know that the pandemic has been worse on female-identifying individuals than male-identifying individuals. And there's probably a variety of reasons for that. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about it later. But one of the things you can see is, especially for teenagers, those rates of anxiety and depression that were already increasing prior to the pandemic continue to get worse during the pandemic, and that we're seeing that as being a major problem for youth. Now, a lot of times people are like, what's going on with this generation? What's wrong with them? Why are they having all of these problems? And most people are like, it's social media, right? And it's yes and. This generation has a lot to deal with. So before the pandemic, again, we saw these high rates. And so if you think about the things this generation has to deal with, it looks very different than what most of us dealt with when we were youth. So for me, I didn't even plan to go to college. when I was a senior, my friends were thinking about it, and many of them were going places, and nobody in my family went to college, so I wasn't really into it. And right before the year ended, I was like, oh, I should probably maybe do something, because what am I going to do for the next year? And so I picked my college, where I did my undergraduate degree, based on a place where all you had to do is have $30 in a pulse, because I hadn't really planned for it, right? I didn't take the SATs. I hadn't done all that. I have 8th graders who are doing SAT prep. I have 9th graders who come in tears because they failed a test and they are now not going to get that scholarship they have to get in order to afford college. I mean, things that I never thought of. I graduated in 1999. That was the first time we experienced a mass school shooting, which was here in Columbine. I never thought about mass shootings. Now, my 5-year-old does drills for mass shootings. They're growing up in a different world. And of course, there's social media. So if I were bullied at school, when I went home, that ended. I had a safe place. Kids don't have a safe place from bullying anymore. They deal with a constant information. So if you're a child and you're on social media, today you woke up and there was a mass shooting in Colorado Springs. And if you're an LGBTQ youth, it was targeted at your population. They're just dealing with different things, and that's why we're seeing these mental health problems. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So this is more updated data. One of the things I think is really important, 73% of US parents said their child would benefit from mental health counseling. That is a lot of kids. Now, do we have enough therapists to do that? Absolutely not. At Children's Hospital, we had an 8-month wait list last year for kids to get in for services. Okay? Now, if you are in an acute crisis, can you wait 8 months for services? Absolutely not. We're not going to outgrow this crisis. We're just not. And so we have to innovate through it. We have to think of different ways. How do we as a community help our youth with their mental health? Because there's not enough me's to go around who are trained in this. And so we have to look at it as what do we do as a society? So again, we see 60% of teens with depression did not get treatment in the last year. And again, you have untreated depression, and what happens is it gets worse. And I'm going to show you a slide here of what we see when it goes downstream. Next slide. Okay, this is probably really hard to see. I'm just going to give you the general gist. This is essentially, if you look at this top bar graph, this is people's ages and where it kind of peaks. So on the left-hand side, the greenish color is major depressive disorder, and on the right-hand side, it's anxiety disorder. And we see for both youth and young adults, during the pandemic, they had the highest rates. Now, everybody's anxiety and depression went up. So there's probably many of you in this room who experienced significant anxiety and depression during the pandemic and still may be experiencing that. So we know it impacted all people, but it especially impacted that age group from basically ages 12 to 24. And then we know that it impacted women more than men, or female-identifying people more than male-identifying people. So that's what this little half circle is at the bottom. The shaded parts are essentially that it's impacting, we know, gender differently. All right, let's go to the next slide. So it's not just our older youth that are having problems, it's our younger kids. Oh, so this was at the first of the pandemic. We saw that, again, close to a quarter of parents were reporting that their kids, 5 to 12, were having worsening mental health problems. But the type of symptoms that these little guys had was really different than our older kids. And so we see a little bit of the anxiety and depression, but we're going to see a different kind of way that it manifests. So go ahead to the next slide. So one of the really interesting things we saw is that young kids started to experience more OCD, so these obsessive compulsive behaviors, things like hand washing or checking or rituals, and tics started to develop in kids. And the reason we know this is we looked at insurance claims and we compared insurance claims from before the pandemic to during the pandemic, and we saw for this age group skyrocketing insurance claims for treatment of these disorders. We also know that kids experienced regressive behaviors. So kids that were potty trained prior to the pandemic all of a sudden started having accidents. Kids who were sleeping really well, they weren't sleeping so good anymore. They just needed more of that support. And then we saw a lot of externalizing behaviors. Now, my wife is a school psychologist. Her job is way harder than mine. I see kids for an hour a week, and she sees kids 5 days a week all day long. And during the last 2 years, I can't tell you the number of days she's come home and she's done a risk assessment on a 2-year-old who's threatening to kill other people or harm themselves. She got hit in the face by a shoe the other day. She called me crying, and I was like, I'm so sorry. But kids have just been put in this pressure cooker, and we're just seeing more of these problems. All right, next slide. The other thing that's important, go ahead and just click all and throw all these on the area, are neurodiverse children. So neurodiverse children are children who process information in their minds differently. Their brain just has a different way of seeing information. So some of these children have ADHD, some of them have autism spectrum disorder. But one of the things we know is that they especially struggled during the pandemic, not all of them. Some of these kids did really good with being able to stay at home. But a lot of these kids thrive on routine and consistency. And so we saw things like anxiety and depression go up in these kids, and school problems really get bad. And one of the things we started to see is when kids started to have severe problems at school, they're showing up in our emergency department because they're completely losing it. So again, all this stuff kind of coming together. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so why did we see this happen? Now, we know mental health or mental illness comes from two specific things happening. This is called the diathesis stress model. So diathesis is all the stuff that you're born with. These are your genes, this is everything you experience in the prenatal environment, and then maybe your first couple of years of development. This is things that you can't control. It just is how you came into the world. So if you have a family history of a lot of anxiety, and then potentially when you were in the womb, maybe during birth, it took a while to come out and you didn't get as much oxygen as you needed. And then maybe in the first couple of years of life, there was some inconsistency. Your parents were experiencing financial stress and you had some malnutrition. All of that means you're gonna have a higher diathesis. Now, stress is what you pour on top of diathesis, and stress is what literally turns on some of those genes to manifest mental health problems. So if you have a really high diathesis, you need just a tiny bit of stress to tip you over into experiencing a mental health problem or a physical health problem. If you have very little diathesis, you need a ton of stress on top of that. Now, I would posit that your cup could be empty during the pandemic, and you're gonna have a mental health problem, right? I mean, all of us at least had a day. I mean, mental was that being generous? Was that being yeah. I'm not gonna talk about how many times I cried during the pandemic. My wife, she had our daughter on March 4th, 2020. And I was taking off 2 weeks to be home, and then I was gonna go back to work, and she was gonna stay home for a while, and 2 weeks later, there was no work to go back to. It was all shut down. So it's just a stressful time for people. And so no matter who you were, you're gonna have some of this experience. And again, for our kids who already had a heightened diathesis, the pandemic was truly devastating for them. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So we have to remember that for many of us, we're like feeling good, right? We're back to life. We're not like worrying about taking COVID tests all the time, but kind of. But it's not normal for them because they missed important developmental steps. Many of us, our life was disrupted, but our progression wasn't because we're kind of more fully formed, but they're not. So the way that they see the world is very different. So last year, tragically, I had a dear cousin who died from breast cancer. And I had to travel to her funeral. And my 5-year-old came to me and he said, "Mom, did she die of COVID?" I was like, "How do you know this? Whenever they're sick, do we have to get a COVID test today?" And then my daughter always, she was too young to wear a mask, and she's so mad still. She's like, "Where's my mask? I want my mask." But normal isn't normal for them, and it's gonna take a while for it to be normal. And a lot of us think that now magically things are just better because for a lot of us they are, but for some of these kids, they're so far behind that it doesn't feel better. They actually feel really stressed out that they're expected to perform at a normal pace when things haven't been normal for so long. All right, go ahead to the next slide. So as Tina mentioned, so one of the things that did happen so in spring of 2021, Children's Hospital Colorado was actually the first organization in the history of children's hospitals to declare a mental health emergency. The reason that Children's did this is because we had seen between a 70 to 85% increase of the number of children coming to our emergency department for mental health problems. Now, I work in the outpatient clinic, and every once in a while, you know, in my last 6 years since I worked at Children's, Twice I've been called down to help with evaluations because the emergency department was so full. We were getting called down every single day to help with evaluations. We had children sitting in our emergency department for 3 days because we didn't have enough people to assess them and we had nowhere to send them. Truly an emergency. I hurt my foot not too long ago. I got one of these, it's called a one wheel, it's like a skateboard. My wife was like, don't get that, you're gonna hurt yourself. And 2 days after I had it, I called her and she's like, why are you calling me? I thought you were out on your one wheel. And I said, you need to come and get me, I've hurt myself. And I had to go to the emergency room and I was there for 7 hours. And I'm an adult and it was just a foot injury and I was going out of my mind. So can you imagine a family in a mental health crisis for 3 days sitting in an emergency department? It's a crisis. So in the fall of 2021, all these organizations, so the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Children's Hospitals Association, followed suit and said, we have a national emergency. We need more resources put towards this. We have to focus on this. We have to improve things. And again, you remember that slide where it said 60% of kids with major depressive disorder didn't get treatment last year? This is where they ended up showing up because they didn't. Because we can treat depression. We can treat it in 2 to 3 months in kids. There's a way to do it. So we have to get more upstream. All right, next slide. So just a couple of things on here that are really, really important to note. So we saw this increase. This was across the nation. So here we saw much higher numbers than this, but across the nation we saw a 31% increase of kids coming into emergency departments for mental health. Things we saw, eating disorders. We saw eating disorders increase by 15% over the pandemic. Now, this is probably for a lot of different reasons. Some of it is because, kids are looking at themselves on screens. Kids have lost a sense of control. And one of the things we know happens is when you lose a sense of control, what can you control? What you do or don't eat. And so eating disorders went up. Now, the reason this is a problem, eating disorders are the deadliest mental health problems. They kill more kids and more adults than any other mental health problem. Malnutrition is a terrible thing. It can cause cardiac arrest. So this is a very serious problem. And usually it takes 7 years from the onset of an eating disorder before it's actually identified and treated. So this is a big one, and something that I think we need to keep our eye on. We saw, again, increase of aggressive behavior and self-harming, so children doing things like burning themselves, cutting themselves. Again, all these things, sometimes they feel confusing. It's like, why the heck are kids doing this? They're trying to regulate themselves. They're trying to calm themselves down because they don't feel okay. And although some of these things seem, how could that be helpful? Well, in the short term it is. It's the same thing like using drugs. In the short term, it gives you a different feeling, but in the long term, it's quite problematic. And then again, you'll see down here, of those 30% of kids who came in, we saw a 50% increase in visits for kids who were expressing suicide among female identifying youth, compared to just 3% for males. So why is it so bad for females? Well, first of all, we know that mental health gets worse for females as they go into adolescence. We also know that females are more likely to experience domestic abuse. And the pandemic put a lot of kids at home for a long time. And so that's part of why we think we're seeing these increases in numbers. All right, so next slide. Okay, what a feel-good talk, right? Doom and gloom. So there is hope out there, and there are things that we can do to help support our youth. So I'm going to talk about several different strategies. I'm a dialectic behavior therapist, and I think it's just something that should be taught in schools. I think it's something that should be taught in churches. I think it's something that should be taught to everybody. So again, we can't outgrow the need we have. We have to change the model, and as a society, we have to do things different. Now, the cool thing is, we know that one of the best ways to reduce suicide among youth is to get them connected to a positive adult mentor or role model. Just one positive adult relationship. Isn't that amazing? Because that's so doable. So if you just, as a parent, I of course want my little ones to come talk to me, and I'm going to be devastated when they don't. What are the chances they have in life? I'm a child psychologist. My wife is a school psychologist. Our poor kids. But if they go talk to the neighbor, that's such a positive thing. If they talk to their uncle, that's such a positive thing, because that is going to be life-saving for them, that just one relationship. So remember that, just having that positive relationship with a youth can be life-saving to them. All right, next slide. All right, I'm from Utah, and I had some friends. We lived out in the country, and there was a farmer who grew watermelons, and my friends bought a truck, and they were like, we're going to make some money. We're going to go buy watermelons and go out to the county road and sell watermelons. So they did this. They went and they bought the watermelons for $1 a piece. And they drove out to the county road and they sold the watermelons for $1 a piece. And they did this for a week. And they were like, wow, we're making no money. This isn't as great as we thought. And so they said, we got to do something different. So they thought and they thought and they thought. And my one friend said, I got it. We need to buy a bigger truck. Okay. I told you it was a really bad story. So, but it has a good moral to it, and it's this. A lot of times when something isn't working, our approach is to do more. Let's just do more of that thing. And this is especially true around self-care and wellness. So I'm totally stressed out of my mind, so I need to do more. I need to take this other thing on or this other thing on or add this, meditation or do this thing. So instead, I'm going to encourage us to do different. Right? I'm going to give you a lot of ideas today and just think, is there something, one or two things I can do here that just would be different? And that you don't have to change everything. Now, one of my favorite analogies is if you leave the airport at LAX and you're headed to New York City at JFK, if you change the flight by 1 degree, you'll end up in Washington, D.C. So one degree, one small change over a long course can put you somewhere different. Now, I have to make a disclaimer. I give this talk often. I use that analogy often. And I had a pilot come up to me 4 months ago, and he was like, I love the analogy, but he's like, it's way more complicated than that. He's like, there's weather patterns, there's this, there's that. I was like, I'll let people know that it's much more complicated. So, true to my word, true to my word. All right, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so these are 4 strategies. So what state of mind are you in? Encourage flexible thinking, regulate emotions, don't control them, and build distress tolerance. I'm going to give you 1 or 2 strategies in each of these areas. Again, you might be thinking, I don't have any youth. Then use this for yourself. Build your mental health. And then when you're talking to other people, you can use these kind of same strategies. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so the first is what state of mind you're in. So as a dialectical behavior therapist, we see the world as you are always in one of 3 mind states. You are either in rational mind, emotional mind, or wise mind. Now, rational mind is very fact-based. Give me the facts, it's logical, it's divorced of emotion, and I just need to know these certain things. On the other side of it is emotion mind. It's just whatever I feel, I'm gonna go with. So, if you all make me angry, you're terrible people. And if you've ever had an experience and you walked away and you're like, I can't believe I said that, well, that was your emotion mind. Okay? So in the middle of those is what we call wise mind. And this is the place where intuition lives. This is where you can balance both logic and emotion because both are important. Now, if I go to the grocery store and I'm in rational mind, I just need food to eat and I need economical things. So here are the things I have coupons for. And I need healthy things. So I don't really like quinoa, but I'm gonna get the quinoa and broccoli and the water. And if I go into my emotional mind, I'm getting the Mountain Dew, the donuts, and the Flaming Hot Cheetos. Okay. Now you know some things about me you probably didn't want to know. Now, if I can get in my wise mind, maybe I can get some healthy food, but it doesn't have to be stuff that I hate eating or just stuff that I have coupons for. Maybe I can get the quinoa, but I can also get the Flaming Hot Cheetos. Maybe both could exist. So it's this place. And you know the amazing thing? I love using this language with kids because they'll say something and I'll say, was that your rational mind, your emotional mind, or your wise mind? And I have so many kids, and I'm a training director, so I train psychologists, and so I have many students who are finishing out, and they'll say things, and I'll say, what will your wise mind tell you? I do this for myself. I don't know what to do when I say, what will my wise mind tell me? What is it saying to me? And I am amazed. I can have a 13-year-old say the most insightful thing when I put that frame on it. What would your wise mind tell you? All right, next slide. For little kids, so again, I've got my 5-year-old, we talk about your wizard brain and your lizard brain. So your lizard brain is just the thing that's going to react, and I say it to my son all the time, was that your lizard brain or your wizard brain? Oh, it was my lizard brain. And we know that when we're in our lizard brain, our mad can get in charge of us. The other day, I snapped at my son, Mom, your mad is in charge of you. What would your wizard say? And I was like, well, that's annoying. You must have psychologists as parents. Again, these are just frames that you can have a common language in your house about what comes up here. Because the fascinating thing is every thought and emotion you have is just information. It's not truth, but we treat it like it is. Sit quietly in a room for 5 minutes and you'll be like, all this does is make noise, and a lot of it is nonsense. So why do I get so stuck in it? We aren't our thoughts and we aren't our emotions. We are able to observe them, and what an amazing gift that is. But unless we teach our kids and ourselves, we'll be driven by this instead of us choosing what we select to follow. So that's what this model does. It gives us choice. All right, next slide. Now some people are like, isn't rational mind just the best? Let's just stay in rational mind all the time. Let that soak in. People who are overly rational are annoying. Just like people who are overly emotional, that can be annoying too. So it's not necessarily that it's better to be in either of the brains. And we do this. We get in rational mind or we get in emotional mind. How do we take a step inward and get to that wise mind place? All right, so I'll talk to you about how you do this. Next slide. We anchor ourselves in the present moment. Most of us spend the majority of our time either in the past or the future. I'm a future person. You let me sit in my car and drive home. I live 30 minutes from here. And you know what I'm going to be thinking about? What are we having for dinner? What do I have to do at work tomorrow? You give my wife that same drive. She'll be thinking about that thing I said in the presentation. Did that make them mad? She thinks about the past. I think about the future. We need to be in the present, fully aware in the present. And a lot of times to do that, we have to know where our mind's going. So have you heard of mindfulness? Yeah. So mindfulness is nothing more than paying attention on purpose. And all you do for mindfulness, a lot of times it's breathing, but it's picking something and saying, I'm going to keep my attention here. Now, inevitably, where will your attention go? All over the place. And people are like, I can't do mindfulness. I'm like, did your mind go somewhere else? And did you notice it and bring it back? Well, yeah, that's mindfulness. So if I ask you to breathe for 60 seconds and focus on your breath, and your mind goes 15 places, and you're like, oh, I'm thinking about the future. Let me come back to the breath. And then 3 seconds later, it goes somewhere else. That's mindfulness. You're practicing noticing your mind going somewhere else and bringing it back. It's not staying here. It's bringing it back. And the more you practice that, the more you'll start noticing in waking life that you're walking and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm having a thought. I'm having an emotion. And you're aware of it instead of being like pulled by it. Next slide. Okay, so breathing is great. There's tons of mindfulness. If you Google mindfulness for kids, there's so many examples. You know, you can do walking mindfulness or eating mindfulness. You know, tonight when you eat dinner, use your non-dominant hand. It'll slow you down, and you just be aware of it. And it's not to have a major insight. It's just to keep your mind in the present. So my son, this is what he gets to do at night. We place our finger on the rainbow, breathe in, and then breathe out. Again, he's probably going to be so socially weird, but we're going to love him through it. But the reason we use breathing so often is breathing is always with you. No matter where you go, you have your breath. So again, lots of things you can do for mindfulness, like you listen to music, again, mindful walking, but the breath is a great one because it's always there. All right, so the last thing I'll leave you with here is just one final thought about what we're trying to do. So next slide. Now, if I hadn't just got off being sick and it was a different world, I would actually do this demonstration, so just pretend. So imagine that I have a shot glass, and then an 8-ounce glass and a 16-ounce glass of water. Now, imagine that I pour a teaspoon of salt in the shot glass and I drink it. How's it going to taste? Salty, yeah. And then I do it in the 8-ounce glass. How do you think it's going to taste? Less salty, but still probably salty. And in the 16-ounce glass. Okay, if I was here doing it, you wouldn't, if somebody were to drink it, they would say, I can't taste the salt. Now, imagine this is, we'll call it a freshwater lake, because if we called it the ocean, that would ruin the example, because the ocean's super salty. So this is a freshwater lake, and I pour a gallon of salt in there, and you put your cup in there and you drink it. Are you going to taste it? No. This is what mindfulness does. It expands the container of your awareness and your tolerance. And most of us have shot glass awareness. When something salty happens, it overwhelms us. We don't like it. And the idea is mindfulness anchors us in the present moment. So when I have the thought and the feeling, and rather than getting lost in it, I see it in a larger context. And so the more we expand, when salty things happen, it's not that they're not salty, it's just they don't overwhelm us. Mindfulness does this. It's the easiest, cheapest way to improve mental health. So you just do mindful breathing 2 to 3 minutes every single day. You're going to notice a difference. Okay. All right, next slide. Okay, the next is how to become flexible thinkers. So the first was your mind frames, flexible thinking. So I got a lot of slides to click through here. So dialectic is essentially a philosophical term. It means there can be truth and opposites. How many of you have ever been sad and happy? Okay. How many of you have ever hated somebody and loved them at the same time? Okay, yeah. And I could do this. How many of you have ever been tough and sensitive all at once? Numerous things. So in DBT, dialectic, the main one is you're doing the very best you can and you can do better. Both are true. This is the best presentation I've ever given. And it could probably be better. Both can be true. So next slide. What do you see? Rabbit, duck, rabbit, duck. Is it a duck or a rabbit? Yes. It's both. Okay, next slide. What color is the dress? Blue? Blue. Who sees blue and black? Okay. And then who sees white and gold? What's wrong with you people? Who can see both? Okay. There's a few people who can see both. Yeah. So is it white and gold or is it blue and black? It's both. And now, for those of you who said blue and black, it just isn't. It's white and gold. That's all I can see. But it's both, right? Something can be your truth and totally be something different for another person. It's a dialectic. Both can be true. Most of our suffering in life comes because we think it can only be one way. It's both. It's both. So here's what we do with that. Next slide. Horse, frog. Horse and frog, yeah. I forgot that I had one more. That was a fun one. There you go. It's both. Horse and frog. If you can't see the frog, the nostril of the horse is the eye. And if you can't see the horse, the lily pad it's sitting on is the horse's mane. Okay, so go to the next slide. So this is what we do with this information to actually make it practical. So I encourage kids to use dialectics. This is the worst year ever. Okay, what's the opposite of that? This is the best year ever. There's truth in both. Look, this year has some challenges and some great stuff to it. Isn't that a more helpful statement? Yeah. School's a waste of time. Yeah. School is completely valuable. There's truth in both. Yeah. School has some pros and cons. That's more helpful than a kid thinking one of these things. I'm totally fine. I'm a complete and total mess. Right now, it's stressful and I'm doing my best. So how do you get kids or yourself to think dialectically? These are your rules. This is the rules in my house and my office. Next slide. These are 4 words you're just never going to say again, although never's on that list, so I shouldn't say that. And so I should. So always and never aren't helpful. My son last night said, "We never have dessert at our house." And I said, "Oh, you can't say never." We don't have dessert at our house tonight. That's true, we don't tonight. But never and always get us stuck in the extremes. All right, should is unhelpful. Psychologists, our joke is don't should on yourself. Shoulds are unhelpful because they're in the past. I should have prepared for this talk. Yeah? But next time I have a talk, I'm going to put more time into it. It's proactive. So you get rid of that. And then but. What's the problem with but? Yeah, it negates what you said before. It's a really nice sweater, but... But, you're a really great audience, but, the people I talked to last week, they were really great. Use and, because both can be true. My sister-in-law does this to my brother all the time. I love you, but, if you don't put away the dishes, I'm going to divorce you. Just, I love you and. So all those things can be true. So if you just change your language, and why is it important to change your language? You change your language, you change your thinking. And you change your thinking, emotion and behavior follow. Powerful. Okay. All right, 2 more things to help out, and then we'll do Q&A. Next slide. Okay, I have so many kids come to me and parents and are like, I just need help controlling my emotions. I'm not the person to see. You can't control your emotions. You can regulate them. You can turn them up and down, but you can't just control them. Now, I'll ask you a question. How many, raise of hands, if you could get rid of all of your emotions today, how many of you would say yes? Okay. Nobody raised their hand. Okay. maybe, one person. Now, when I ask this to a group of young people, how many hands go up? Almost all of them. Okay. Now, part of this is because young people, I'm going to use an analogy that a colleague has given to me, and it's essentially this, that young people are like a car where the gas pedal and engine have been put in, but not the brake pedal yet. They have this brain that's developing, and it develops from the bottom up. So they've got their brain stem for vital life functions. They've got their limbic system, which is your emotional center. And then this is the cortex. And what happens is this doesn't develop until the age of 25 fully. And this is where we learn to control our emotions, where we inhibit things that we say, where we activate behavior. And a lot of kids flip their lid, right? Because this isn't well developed. And so they want to get rid of emotions because they feel them so intensely and they don't have the ability to calm them down the same way that we do. So it's just an important understanding. So what are things we can do to help them regulate their emotions, which means you turn up the difficult ones, or turn up the positive ones and turn down the difficult ones. Next slide. I believe that if these two things were fixed, most mental health problems would be eradicated. And a lot of physical health problems too. Most people don't have any idea how much sleep kids need. How many hours do you think teenagers need of sleep? Good. Those are great numbers. Yeah, 9 to 11 hours of sleep. Now, most kids in our country are sleep deprived. So doing things to help improve sleep, having schedules, limiting the amount of light that happens. When light comes into your eye, it goes through into your pituitary gland. There's a mechanism called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it gets turned off. Why is that important? Because that's what puts melatonin in your body. And so looking at a screen right before bed, all of that is disrupting the stuff that makes us naturally sleepy. So just, is there a way that you can improve your sleep or your kids' sleep? So important. And then hydration. Whenever my kids are getting squirrely, my wife always says, have we watered the children today? We know that hydration is a really important component, that we know that your ability to manage stress is reduced when you are dehydrated. So making sure that you get consistent water. Again, this is good for all of us. This is always my goal. I'm terrible at making sure that I'm fully hydrated. But just some really small things of sleep and hydration and diet can be fundamental for helping kids regulate their emotions. And you've all done this. We have a term in society called hangry. Why do we have a hangry term? Because we become irrational human beings when we're hungry. How many of you get hangry? I will tell my best friend they're dead to me if they stand between me and a cheeseburger and I'm hungry. It's just the way that I am. So that's an important component. The other thing is increasing the positive bank of emotions. So next slide. So a couple of ways to build positive emotions. Now, if you think about this, you're trying to build your bank account with kids and helping them build their bank account. So if you have a lot of positive emotions in you, when difficult things happen, you're more resilient. So those are like the three things resiliency is built on: food, sleep, and positive emotions. So just being present, having no tech zones at your house. I always say get the tech out of the bedrooms, at the dinner table. Most of my youth, my teenagers, are like, my parents say I'm on my phone too much, but man, they're really on their phone. So making sure that you have that time. Healthy modeling. So I always joke, and I say it's teenagers, but it's probably most adults. Teenagers have 3 emotions. I'm fine, I'm tired, or I'm frustrated. That's the range. And so one of the things that's really important, especially for youth, is for us to model how we're feeling and to use a variety of descriptors. So like, I'm feeling exhilarated today. I'm feeling trepidation. I'm feeling exasperated. My son was like, Mom, what's exasperated? But they become curious about that. And so making sure that you're talking about that and modeling. And one of the things that we know is we've actually put people in MRI machines, and if they can name the emotion they're experiencing, the rate of neural firing decreases. It's called name it to tame it. If we can name our emotions, we actually feel better. And how many of you have had that experience? You just feel lost and somebody says something and all of a sudden you're like, yes, that's how I'm feeling. Something about naming it is so essential. All right, I always say have a family fun mystery bag. And so this is something small that you can have just different activities. Like we're gonna go to the park, we're gonna go get ice cream, we're gonna go look at holiday lights. And once a week, you just have family time, and you put your hand in the bag and you pull those things out. And you don't have to do things that cost money. It can be, like so-and-so, like Logan gets to pick the movie we watch tonight on TV, whatever it is. But something that brings some excitement and where your kids or you can experience joy, wonderment, and awe This is, I mean, when you can experience wonderment and awe, it is like so healing for your mental health. And we just don't have enough things in life. That's why sometimes being on screens too much is not helpful, because you don't necessarily always feel a lot of wonderment and awe. And then finally, social connection. So making sure that you have time in those relationships. Now, is being online a problem? No, but the problem is that's your only social connection. So making sure that you're having those real life moments. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is the last skill I'm going to talk to you about. This is like a very nuanced analogy. If you've ever watched Frozen 2, this person is lost in the woods. There's a whole song about it. So there's like 2 people who got the joke in this room, but it's really funny if you know that. Again, I have really small children. But if you get lost and you're hiking, what are you supposed to do? What was it? Stop. Yeah. There's different things, but why are you supposed to stay put? Yeah, because if you keep moving, you're going to get more lost. Distress tolerance is the skill of being able to sit in extreme discomfort and not make it worse. Now, when most of us are in extreme discomfort, what is our natural tendency? To get out, to do something to make it be immediately better. But to make it immediately better, you tend to make it worse in the long term. So if I'm really, really upset with you and I scream at you, is that going to make me feel immediately better? Heck yeah, well, that's why people scream at people. But then it feels worse. If I want to pick up a drink and feel better immediately, is that going to help me? Immediately, yes, it will. That's why people develop those problems. But long term, it doesn't. So distress tolerance is how do you sit in it and it doesn't get better, but you wait for it naturally to calm down. And we teach kids that, you know what, you're not going to be in that feeling forever. It eventually will come down. You don't have to cut yourself or scream or act out or whatever it is. You know, for some of us, it's binge watching Netflix for the next 7 hours. We all have our maladaptive coping. So these are a couple of distress tolerance tips. Next slide. Okay. So we're actually going to do this with the youth at some point. But this is a crisis survival box. So I grew up Mormon, and Mormons really are about preparedness. My family has a whole a year supply of food in their house. My parents every Christmas give me supplies for the apocalypse or the pandemic or whatever it is. So they're all about preparedness. So we want to do the same thing. So if you think about having a first aid kit, it's stuff you need in the moment. So this is a distress tolerance kit. So this is mine. So I have things like putty in here. I've got some finger paints. I've got a Lego kit to put together because that just gets my mind off things. I always joke and I tell kids, these are called photographs. This is what we had before phones. I've got some photographs in here of my favorite places and people because sometimes you don't want to be on your phone. I have some essential oils in here that smell really nice. I have a letter from my wife in here about why she loves me, some fidgets. So a couple of just things where in a moment in distress, I can just pull it out and get lost in the box. And do I feel better? Not necessarily, but I don't feel worse. And given enough time, I will feel better. So you don't want kids in complete distress and then them having the moment to think about what are my coping skills. I want something they can just grab. I can't tell you how many kids who have said literally this has saved their life. And it's a fun thing for families to put together. It's a fun thing to give to kids as a gift of here's a distress tolerance box, build on it. But it's such a simple thing that can be so helpful. And then finally, these are the tip skills. When you're in extreme distress, you're in your fight or flight mode. These are things that will bring your heart rate down immediately. So the first is sticking your head in really cold water. I can't tell you, I've done this several different times when I've been very upset, and it just helps reset you. Now, you can use an ice pack as well, but it has to be set right here and for about 30 seconds. This area triggers what we call the mammalian dive reflex. Have you ever dove into really cold water and your whole body just... Okay, it's just this natural part of us, and so it kicks in our parasympathetic or our calming response. Okay, the next is intense exercise. So going out for that run or doing some burpees or some jumping jacks, whatever it is, again, that's going to help calm the body down. And then the last is called paced breathing. So this is breathing in for a certain amount of time. Breathe in for 4 seconds. Hold. Breathe out. But you would breathe in for 4, hold for 5, breathe out for 6. Now, the important thing here is if you do paced breathing, you have to breathe out longer than you breathe in. That's what triggers your parasympathetic response. Now, here's my trick for you. Practice this when you're really calm, not when you're stressed. And if you have kids, have them practice this when they're really calm, and have them practice it 3 to 4 times a week for 3 or 4 weeks. And then when they're really stressed, use it then. But I have so many kids who come in and are like, I tried that deep breathing stuff, it doesn't work. I'm like, well, when did you try it? Well, I was having a panic attack. I'm like, oh, so if I wanted you all to learn guitar, would the best way to be to put you on a stage in front of 100 people and say, try that out? No. You don't want to practice a brand new skill in a high-stress situation. You want to do it when it's really easy. So a lot of times if you've done things like breathing or progressive muscle relaxation, you're like, it makes me more anxious, it's because you tried to do it when you were anxious before the skill was developed. So go back and practice it for a couple of weeks, and then you can use it in high-stress situations. All right, next slide. Okay, guess what? This is our last slide. Was it fun and engaging? Yes. Okay, good. I always like when people tell me it's the last slide because I feel like there's just a new sense of hope in my life. Even when it's a good talk, right? All right, so there's just something beautiful about finding your wise mind, and part of that is how big is your frame. And all these things I talked about today can help you expand that frame. Now, this is my beautiful daughter who is older now. This is when she was 1. She was not sleeping through the night at all. And I was up with her every single night. I'm not the bio mom. My wife carried her. So my gift to my wife was like, I get up at night with the kids. So I think I got the better end of the deal still. So I'm up with her, and it's been 2 weeks straight, and I'm just so angry. I'm like, why did I have kids? I'm never going to sleep again. This is terrible. And I just almost wanted to shake her. I was so upset. And so I finally get her to sleep, and I get, an hour of sleep. I'm up that day, and I'm just like exhausted. And I'm like, I just am tired of this being my life. I just want her to change. And I get to work, and I'm reading some news before I jump into the day, and I come across the story of a family who just lost their 2-year-old to leukemia. And I just start sobbing, because here I am, I'm so angry at this little person. But wow, would that family have done anything? They'd be up with their kid every single night. And my frame just blew up. And, that's the important part, and that's where resilience comes in. And it's both and. It's not saying this situation doesn't matter. It's not saying that what I was going through isn't hard. It wasn't pushing that away. It was saying, you're going through such a hard thing, and it makes sense why you're losing your mind. And you get your kid. You get to hold her at night. It's both, right? So take that with you. Take the and when you're in a hard situation, think of your current frame, validate it, and how do you expand it a little bit wider? Okay, that's all I got for you. Thanks.
If you have any questions for Jenna, just let me know. I'll bring the mic to you. Please do wait till I have the mic so that we can hear you. And if y'all don't, I do.
I'll take a seat.
Question and an observation. Question is, when that pilot told you that 1 degree might have been off, did you find that depressing?
Did I find that what?
Depressing.
I found it funny.
I've just completed through the VA a 3-month cognitive therapy for PTSD, and a lot of what you're talking about would be useful there. Some of it's very similar. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I am glad that you had that. You went through that experience, and one of the things CBT is like a really, really great therapy, and it's really helpful. And DBT was created to complement it, because sometimes just changing your thoughts isn't enough, right? Sometimes just can't change them, and so can I accept them? It can be both, right? And that's why I love DBT. I just these are just great skills for everybody. So thank you for sharing that.
Hi, thank you so much. I came in a little bit late, so I hope this isn't a repeat, but what's the best way to just start these conversations with your kids, and at what age?
So any age. And so I think part of the ways to start the conversation is just, doing check-ins with your kids. Like, how are you feeling? Even for our little ones, we ask them, like, what was really hard today? And how did you solve that? Or did you get stuck, and where did you get stuck? And what was really fun today? It's always both, right? You'll have some kids who minimize, and you'll have some kids who only look at the negative, so asking those both questions. As your kids get older, asking them, like, what problems are you dealing with that you don't feel like you can solve? And then as kids are getting to like 9, 10, 11, depending on like if you have a kid who's been depressed, starting at age 9, I would start asking about suicide. And just like every once in a while, like, are you getting stuck? Are you ever having thoughts of not wanting to be here? Or wanting to disappear. When kids get older, 13, 14, like I would, just check in, just doing our mental health check-in. Any thoughts of wanting to harm yourself or kill yourself? Parents are really worried about that, but it just normalizes it because 27% of kids have thoughts of killing themselves every single year. So it's something that most kids experience. And so being able to ask about it and just check in, and we know that the best way of reducing it is to ask about it. So I think early on just saying, I'm just doing our wellness, our mental health check-in, how are things going, and just having those ongoing conversations. And then as a family, like, so I grew up Mormon, and they have, I didn't think that would come up so much today, but apparently I need to talk about that. They have family night, and they call it family home evening. And I love that tradition, and I'm no longer Mormon, but we implement the same thing. And so we have family night. In our family night, we have wellness night. And so it's, what are we going to do for our mental health this week? And so I think it's just like talking about those things with and being purposeful. Yeah. It's a great question.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you because I'm a principal at a K through 8 for children with neurodiversity and learning disabilities. And a lot of our staffing and stakeholder problems or issues this year are a direct result of a lack of awareness around this. Everyone just wants to get to business as usual. And I keep telling them it's not going to be business as usual for a good few years because of what you spoke about this morning. So thank you for increasing awareness about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the work you're doing. Again, I feel like anybody working in K through 12 has like the hardest jobs. So,
Yeah, I guess I'll ask one final question. I've wondered for quite a while, is there something that you think we could be doing better societally for K-12 to acknowledge what our kids have lost, acknowledge the delays in their development, and give them the space and the time they need? Mm-hmm. And how do we push for that?
So two things, I think. So first is I think like universal screening of kids, and you're starting to see that. Like the Joint Task Force just came out and said that we need to screen all kids 8 and older for anxiety and depression at pediatrician visits, because it's more likely that a kid will see a pediatrician than they'll ever see me. And we know that 80% of people who die by suicide have seen their physician or pediatrician within the last 6 months. So that's really important. And then the second is like just increasing training for coaches, for community members about mental health. So instead of saying, just get over it, what's wrong with these kids? Why, they just need to put their phones down and they'd be fine. That's such an oversimplification. And so I think having that empathy, and so talking to youth and saying, what's going on? What are you dealing with? How are you doing? And if they talk to you about their problems, what is our number one go-to? It's called the writing reflex. We want to give them advice and fix their problems. I went to school for 8 years to squash it. People always joke, it's like, how hard is it just to listen to people? I'm like, it's pretty hard, honestly. And so ask youth how they're doing, and instead of solving their problems, validate them. It sounds really challenging. I never had to deal with that same stuff when I was a youth. Wow, it's amazing that you keep going the way that you are. So talk to them, ask them how they're doing, give them encouragement, don't solve their problems. If you want to give them advice, ask for permission. Say, would it be okay if I gave you some advice? And just simply asking that is going to make them more receptive to it. I ask youth all the time when I'm working with them, could I give you some advice on this? I've never had a youth say no. But I certainly have had youth shut down when I give them advice without asking them. So those are a few things.
Yeah, I always ask our youth, do you want to just tell me about this, or would you like me to give you any advice? And I have actually had youth say, no, I don't want advice, just
Yeah.
listen to me, which
Yeah.
is sweet.
And
Jenna
you should do that
will
with your partner. I ask that to my wife all the time. I'm like, is this a advice giving, or is this just me being supportive spouse? So I can save your marriage.
That is, yeah, that's a marriage saving question. How many people were at the 8 o'clock? Yeah. So if you weren't there, y'all are so lucky because at the 10:30, Amy Newell-Large is preaching today, and she is actually going to give us a chance to do some mindfulness practice during her sermon today. So lean into that and enjoy it, and then take it to all the children in your lives. Jenna will be back at an as yet unscheduled date to work with our youth to build those toolboxes. Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you to those who joined us online, and we'll see you at 10:30 at church, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.